Good afternoon and welcome to the Full Scottish on Sunday the 21st of January. My name is Brian Liddy and I'm joined this afternoon by two guests. I've got Martin Docherty-Hughes and Hugh Marshall. Welcome both today. Martin, you've been a Member of Parliament since 2015 and you're the SNP MP for West Dunbartonshire since then, and you've served on the SNP Defence spokesperson since 2003 last year, and you're also on the Defence Select Committee. So thank you for giving up part of your Sunday for us here today.
Nice to see you, Brian, and hello to Hugh and the team.
Yes, and Hugh, you're a regular here on the Full Scottish, and you're a founder of the national newspaper in Wales and also Talk in Wales. So welcome.
Thank you. Docherty.
So I'll start with our sadly routine Ukraine update, and today is day number 697. Russian President Vladimir Putin showed his intention to visit Pyongyang soon, North Korea's state media KCNA reported today. Putin thanked North Korean leader Kim Jong-un for the invitation as he met North Korean Foreign Minister Cho Son-hui, who visited Russia last week. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky fears that if Donald Trump returns to the White House next year, he could make unilateral concessions to Russia that override Ukraine's interests, and branded the former US president's claims he could stop the war in 24 hours as very dangerous. Zelensky also spoke of putting together new bilateral agreements that will reanimate the system of international law. On Saturday, Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico said that Ukraine was under the absolute control of the United States. The populist politician, who is against military aid to war-torn country and opposes sanctions against Russia, also reiterated his opposition to Ukraine's bid to join NATO. The UK Ministry of Defence has reported that Ukraine maintains a presence on the left bank of the Dnipro River and has continued to repel Russian attacks despite logistical concerns. Russian MPs are preparing a bill allowing for the confiscation of money and property from people who spread deliberately false information about the country's armed forces. Russia has lost 375,270 troops in Ukraine since the beginning of the war, the General Staff of Ukraine's armed forces claimed on Saturday. The number, which has not been independently verified, includes 750 casualties over the past day. The International Atomic Energy Agency has said that Russian troops have reinstalled mines along the perimeter of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in the occupied Zaporizhzhia Oblast. The wife of a Russian soldier delivered an emotional appeal for his return from Ukraine on Saturday at the election headquarters of Putin. It was a defiant gesture by Maria Andreeva in a country where open criticism of the war is banned. Andrei Yermak, the head of the office of the Ukrainian presidency, has echoed Winston Churchill in an interview with Le Figaro, discussing the war in Ukraine, where he said, "Give us the tools and we will finish the job." Romanian protesters have ended their blockade at the Porubny-Siret crossing along the Romanian-Ukrainian border, according to the Kyiv Independent. Russian forces launched 7 Shahed 136-131 attack drones against Ukraine, 4 of which were shot down by Ukraine's air defences, according to an update from the General Staff. Russia has accused Ukraine of being behind a drone strike that sparked a huge inferno at an oil depot in western Russia on Friday, the latest in a series of escalating cross-border attacks. Russian officials and news reports said 4 oil reservoirs with a total capacity of 6,000 cubic metres were set on fire at the oil refinery after the drone reached Klintsy, a city of 70,000 people located about 60 kilometres from the Ukrainian border. So, Martin, as you're the SNP Defence spokesperson and you're also on the Defence Select Committee, was there anything in today's update that caught your eye?
Yeah, I think, Brian, the drone attack on the oil refinery, I think just west of St. Petersburg, was quite a tactic from the Ukrainians just to remind Vladimir Putin about their own capabilities. There might be challenges actually on the physical front line. And when I talk about the front line, I talk about that part of Ukraine which the Russian Federation has illegally captured during this war. I think the drone attack shows the capability using small types of technology like a drone to go so far into the Russian Federation and not to have been targeted by the Russians is quite extraordinary. It shows a whole range of, I think, difficulties for them. And yeah, I just thought it was an interesting part of what's unfolding. And again, just to say our support for Ukraine for its right to national self-determination, defend its borders and to live peaceably as a sovereign independent country.
Thank you, Martin. And Hugh, the same question to you. Was there anything that you wanted to elaborate on?
No, I think it's obviously that a lot of the talk this week has been around support from the United States and the potential danger of a Trump presidency and that support being withdrawn from the United States. But one thing that I read this week and I was surprised was apparently South Korea are the biggest suppliers of shells to the Ukraine. So even though we get this impression that the EU and the US are the sort of the mainstays of it, it's clear that it is a global effort to support Ukraine. But it's been going on so long now. He's just wondering, where is the end going to come from?
Complex, and who knows how it's all going to unravel. Thank you, Hugh. Our next item is Gaza and Israel. There was a report released on Friday. The UN Women have said that about 16,000 women and children have been killed in Gaza since the war began. That includes about 2 mothers every hour. With 1 million of Gaza's 2.3 million population forced into a small area in the south of the enclave, evidence of the allegations of genocide by Israel have become apparent. That's no worries. I'm getting a clarification. It's 1.9 million of Gaza's 2.3 million population have been forced into a small area in the south of the enclave. There's evidence of allegations of genocide by Israel have become apparent. EU diplomat Joseph Borrell and said Hamas was financed by the Israeli government in an attempt to weaken the Palestinian Authority. Again, forgive me, Hugh, but I'm going to go to Martin first. This again, it's just a bit cheeky of me, but as defence representative, are you hearing anything that we're maybe not hearing about what's happening in Gaza and Israel?
I think everyone's hearing it at the exact same time, Brian. The devastation being rained upon the people of Gaza is an appalling state of affairs, and no one can decry what Hamas did was also appalling. It was a barbarous act by a death cult, but this indiscriminate targeting of innocent people in Gaza has to stop. I mean, I think some of the numbers you were given have been extraordinary. The kind of destabilization of that part of the Mediterranean, impacting, of course, now through the Red Sea, has a profound impact on all of us, and it really is beholden on both, on Israel and Hamas to have a ceasefire and stop the death. I think the UN Secretary General has also been very clear that there needs to be now clear, unambiguous intention of the international community to ensure a two-state solution. Clearly, we're seeing some pushback in Israel on that issue, and that can't be allowed to happen. And this just needs to stop. Ceasefire needs to start now, and the death needs to stop. Thank
you, Martin. And Hugh, this claim by Joseph Borrell that Hamas was financed by the Israeli government in an attempt to weaken the Palestinian Authority. Does that sound plausible to you?
With Israel, anything's possible, I'm afraid. We don't know the ins and outs of what's going on. There's so many, sort of theories and conspiracies around how Hamas were able to carry out their attack. without any prior knowledge, with the Israeli sort of intelligence services supposedly being one, if not the best in the world. But it's just created a hell on earth. As Martin was saying, it's just indiscriminate bombing now. I think almost virtually every hospital now has been bombed in the Gaza Strip. I think there's only one hospital left functioning. So just thinking ahead, the rebuilding of Gaza is going to be a monumental job. But as I say, that rebuilding can't start until the current conflict comes to an end, and there's no sign of that. And Netanyahu, I think, is, his time as the leader. People are saying now it's just a matter of weeks. He's very unpopular. He's seen as handled it all very, very badly. But as you say, it's just it's a mess.
Thanks, Hugh. And Netanyahu, I think he's also trying to avoid convictions, isn't he? And he's being sent to jail. Martin, the same question to you. The claim by Borrell, do you think it's plausible that Israel could have funded Hamas?
Well, I mean, the complexity of that part of the world is extraordinary. I mean, whether it's Israel trying to undermine the cause of its two-state solution, would it necessarily, is it Israel or is it the government of Netanyahu? I think Benjamin Netanyahu has a lot to answer for. I think there are also people in Israel who are opposed to this war. You might not hear about it in the TV channels or in the press, but there will be people in Israel who are opposed to this, as there are people in Russia who are opposed to Putin. We have other actors in the area, such as the theocrats in Tehran, who are also playing a part here. My friend, what's that old saying? The enemy of my friend or the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Yeah, your enemy is not my friend. That kind of stuff. It would not surprise me that in conflicts like this, that people and governments and political leaders make alliances behind closed doors, which they think will further their ambition. How they think that, how they square that circle, I have no idea. But in these types of situations, I'm sure we could all come to the conclusion that something like this may be happening. Of course, without the evidence, it would be difficult to prove, I have to say.
And Martin, Israel's comeback on that was that it was untrue, and the evidence they gave for it was simply the fact that they've been annihilating or razing Gaza to the ground for years now. So again, I don't know if that's actually they didn't actually do. It's not evidence that they haven't done. But maybe we've only got a couple of minutes left. Maybe we should talk about the deaths. The UN women. And the 16,000 women and the mothers that have been dying. Hugh, are you familiar with the acronym WCNSF? No, you there?
So say that again.
WCNSF in relation to deaths in Gaza. It stands for Wounded Child No Surviving Family. And we mentioned it last week. Which I don't know, it's just incredible that.
Yeah, I think what's interesting with the numbers is the denial, because obviously the Israeli government, the IDF, claim that any numbers that come out of Gaza cannot be corroborated because it's under Hamas control. But even sort of United Nations are corroborating that the numbers are extremely high, and yet the Israeli government are in denial of the United Nations as well. But it's an appalling situation. As with any war, it is it's the innocents who suffer most.
Thanks, Hugh. Martin, is it an acronym that's used much in Westminster in your day job?
No, but I think what's the issue for me with these numbers is the long-term consequences of what I would call childhood bereavement trauma. Those children who do survive without parents, notably those who may be orphaned. I mean, the numbers that you're quoting are, I think, probably an underestimation. But the long-term consequences for that area of the world, that Palestine, and also for Israel and the wider Middle East, childhood bereavement trauma is, it's going to be extraordinary how they have to deal with that in the next 30 to 40 years and how it impacts future generations in that whole location. And it's profoundly sad. What else can you say? You know, the murder of innocent people for this type of situation and the long-term consequences. I mean, I come from Clydebank and we had the worst aerial bombardment of the Second World War in these islands. And you clearly do see in your parents and grandparents of that generation that there was some type of childhood trauma, and it leads to a whole range of consequences. So, yeah, just deeply appalling.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. So we'll move on to the next item, which is the post office scandal. So both the Post Office CEO and the Fujitsu UK boss gave evidence to the House of Commons Business Committee this week. Paul Patterson from Fujitsu seemed shocked and apologetic in his evidence. Nick Reed, the Post Office CEO, seemed evasive by comparison. Hugh, I'll come to you first this time for a change. So Mr. Patterson was asked if Fujitsu was an ethical company, and he apologised and said yes, that he thought it was. Do you agree? Do you think Fujitsu is an ethical company?
It's an interesting one because I was actually listening to some of the testimony that he was giving. LBC News were broadcasting it live. It's remarkable that Fujitsu have got fingers in so many pies across sort of technology databases. I read somewhere that they were behind the TV licensing as well. So that I was on a train and I noticed that the train guard had a Fujitsu ticket machine. So they are everywhere. But I just find it unbelievable that a company that have been revealed now to have been part of such a scandal are still in business. You would think that this would usually when you get that rat in a moment, it finishes a company off. But they're still being awarded contracts, and they've voluntarily withdrawn from any bidding of for new technology contracts. So it's not a case of that they've been banned from bidding. They've brought that on by doing that themselves. And it was good to hear the leadership of Fujitsu in Europe now admitting to these issues. But when he was saying that potentially that Fujitsu employees were involved in sort of not giving full evidence that led to people's convictions, is you can't say that a company's ethical if they've behaved like that in the past. Clearly, they've moved forward, but it's just astonishing. And obviously, the story has a lot of roots in Wales because Mr. Bates, who is now famous following the ITV series, he was based in Llandudno, and he was the one who led it. And Noel Thomas, who was one of the we interviewed him for the National in Wales. Regarding sort of his criminal conviction, it's just astonishing. But what's interesting as well is S4C covered the story back in 2009, so it's not something that's been that's new and out to the blue. But it shows the power of TV. When you get something like a big drama, sort of making it clear to people, then that's when governments act.
Yeah, I think there's been panorama documentaries about it and everything. I just finally caught up with the ITV drama last week, and I can understand why it's had the effect it had. And you say people have been covering it. Martin, your colleague Marion Fellows, she was in the room when Mr. Patterson and Mr. Reed were being interviewed. You could see her often sitting behind them, and it's worth looking at the expression on her face. But Mr. Patterson, he went on to sort of say that when he said it was an ethical company, he said he apologised. He gave what seemed a sincere apology and said the company today isn't what it was then. And it's also kind of important to draw the distinction, do you think, between that really it's the post office they're the ones that withheld evidence, and Nick Reed just seemed evasive. I'm sorry, I'll let you say something now. I'm rambling.
Yeah, I mean, well, Marion, I watched the evidence session from my office in Parliament, and I did see Marion's face. I think she was being rather, she was controlling herself, let's put it that way. I think people like Marion, who has been one of the people leading from the front, and also people like James Arbuthnot, who's in the Lords at the other end, have been doing tremendous work. And I just look at the whole issue around the post office. I think they totally to blame at the heart of this. When you look at the evidence that's brought forward, when you listen to the evidence from those who suffered and who have lived through this and their families. But then there's also the issue of the company, and I'm aware of the article that Peter Geehan did on contracts for a Tory donor who's a former UK Fujitsu chair, who was paid to lobby for a firm that landed lucrative contracts from the government agency, which he actually now runs. So there is a thread of what I would maybe, and I need to be careful what I said. I mean, I did say something in the House during Prime Minister's questions where I talked about collusion between the state and private companies, and that was in relation to mortgage prisoners, in which there are probably around about 20,000 in Scotland, and it's not dissimilar in that the post office, in a sense, technically the state, acting in a way, and this goes as far back as the last Labour government. When you hear the Labour MP Pat McFadden standing up and defending the post office at that period, and then continues with the Lib Dems through Ed Davey when he was, as well as leader of the Liberal Democrats in the UK Parliament. You had Tory ministers as well. It just seems an utter abdication of responsibility and sticking the head in the sand and just thinking it'll all disappear. And thankfully it hasn't, and hopefully justice will come for those who have suffered so erroneously.
Thanks, Martin. And again, as you're in the corridors at Westminster, are you getting any sense of how long it's going to take for the victims of the post office scandal to get some kind of recompense?
Well, this is Westminster we're talking about, and what I can say is that both the Tories and Labour are kind of trying to be very quiet about it. I mean, when you look at PMQs, how is it raised by the leader of the opposition? He's very conscious that his previous government, was a participant in this under Gordon Brown, if not Tony Blair. And, this whole, let's not talk about it. Let's see if it'll go away. Let's pay people off. I think there's enough people in Parliament whose voices are now being heard above the fray that it won't be until it's dealt with adequately and people are compensated as they are due.
Thanks, Martin. Hugh, I'm conscious that I'm not bringing you in as much, but I will do as we go on, I promise. Martin, could you maybe just say something a wee bit more about those mortgage prisoners, was it you called it?
Yeah, so this goes back to the fall of the banks, when the UK government was being applauded for saving the economy by bailing out the private banking sector in the UK. And what that did, if you were, for specifically a Northern Rock mortgage holder, if you weren't able to get out of your mortgage and move on quickly, you became a mortgage prisoner. Now, I have to be actually up front, I was a Northern Rock mortgage holder, and I was lucky. My husband and I were able to move on to a new mortgage, but there are at least 200,000 people in the UK today, around about 20,000 in Scotland, as I said, who are locked into what we call a specific mortgage, which is not variable, and where we all think our mortgages were going up for the last couple of years due to inflation and cost of living. If you're a mortgage prisoner, your mortgage is, you're not even paying off the interest. And a lot of these people are going to lose their homes. And the UK government, not only the Tories, but the previous Labour administration, who started to allow these types of mortgages, these kind of 100% mortgages, because, they were A+ rated. These are not, these people are going into a financial system supported by the government. They need to be allowed to go into, variable mortgages so that they can save their homes, stay at home, and also live their lives there, just being held back. It's an extraordinary situation in which I think there is collusion between the government and the private sector to deny these people the ability to move on to new mortgages, whilst at the same time fleecing them for money, which is going to companies, equity companies outside the UK.
Thanks, Martin. Hugh, I do have something for you here. It's still staying on the post office. We've got a minute to go. So here in Scotland, it's the Crown Office and the Procurator Fiscal Service that's responsible solely for prosecuting the Horizon cases. But you're kind of lumped in. Wales is lumped in with England,
Yeah,
isn't it? Where the post
yeah,
office takes on the cases themselves.
yeah. So again, under the sort of judicial sort of system that we have here, where England and Wales, and that's something I'm sure we'll be touching on later on when we talk about the constitutional report on Wales this future.
Thanks, Hugh. So I will move on then to the next item. So the Rwanda bill. Let me get my notes straight. Despite Tories in open revolt, Rishi Sunak passed his Rwanda bill this week. It's now going to go up to the Lords, and it's probably going to get amended because the Tories don't have a majority there. Um, um, but will flights to Rwanda ever take off? Hugh, uh, what's your take on it from
Is the ultimate dead cat, isn't it? Where they're just trying to pander to, I don't know, 10-20% of the population who have been fooled basically into thinking that all of the the UK's woes are due to what is in totality a handful of people coming over on small boats because there are no safe routes for them to come in. But every time I come on on Broadcast Scotland, I keep mentioning the Tories in their final death throes, and I think the fish has been out of the river for quite a while now, and its flip flopping is beginning to come to an end. It's just desperate stuff from a desperately sad once great political party that the Conservative Party once was, but is no more.
Thank you, Hugh. And Martin, I'm guessing you were in the room when that debate happened. What was it like?
Yeah, for some of it, I was. You could see Alison Thewlis was leading from the front for us, and I thought it remarkable that some of the reporting on the bill, for example, you look at Sky News, were talking about SNP's guerrilla tactics on the Rwanda bill could mean late votes. I mean, God forbid that MPs should actually be voting on elements of a bill which will have profound consequences for human rights and also which is an absolute waste of time. I just think that kind of kind of shows you the kind of narrative that has been spun by the British establishment about how this type of bill and we're the guerrilla tactics about making people do their job. I mean, it was extraordinary. What gets me about the Rwanda bill more than just some of the issues that Hugh was talking about, it is inextricably linked to some of this reactionary element of the Tory party, the kind of Brexit element, the kind of whole anti-woke agenda as they lead up to the next general election, tied into a kind of Trumpian approach to politics. So, it's dangerous stuff, but more than that, the kind of utter waste of time, if you could have invested in the immigration system, first of all, you probably wouldn't be halfway as problematic as they think it is now, or creating safe routes. And also, the money being spent. I mean, I have to say, I've spoken to some people who are training to be security guards on these planes. And I believe there's to be at least 100 security guards on each flight. And they're going to get paid £1,000 per flight. I mean, that's just insane. It shows you the type of money. I mean, you're talking about, shipping off in planes extremely vulnerable individuals. It's crass beyond belief and just shows the kind of tactics of the right-wing Tory party. But again, just to say, it was the SNP that were pushing the majority of these votes to expose them for what they were. I mean, it wasn't the official opposition.
Thanks, Martin. It's probably just mentioning Kenmure Street here at this point, but Martin, we were told the way it looked before the debate and before the vote, it looked like there was going to be a huge Tory rebellion. People like Lee Anderson and Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg were threatening. And so tell me, were you in the no lobby when Lee Anderson claimed to be
try and stay away from Lee Anderson as much as possible. I just think, there was a lot of hot air by certain journalists on that day. We all knew the night before, when the initial so-called Great Rebellion took place, we could overhear them saying, "Oh no, I'll be voting with the government tomorrow." I mean, this was a done deal before Wednesday, and I thought it was a bit ludicrous of some well-known journalists in the big news agencies saying, "Is the government going to win?" They knew as much as we knew that the night before it was done and dusted, and the rebellion was going to peter out. And I just thought it was lazy journalism, to tell you the truth. Anyone who on Wednesday thought the government wasn't going to have a majority, reporting that, is just spinning out a kind of a false narrative about, basically just to get clicks, frankly. So everybody knew the night before that it wasn't going to happen, and that the rebellion would peter out. And they were being very open about it in the no lobby. But as I said, as to Lee Anderson, the fact that he didn't even vote, I found it absolutely. I mean, it would be funny if it wasn't so serious. It's quite pathetic, actually.
Yes, and Hugh, I don't know, did you manage to catch Jacob Rees-Mogg? He tweeted that he wasn't going to support the bill because, let me see, he said it won't work unless it's amended. He said it would be ineffective and would make the government look hopeless. And then he reneged and voted for it. I don't know if you caught the exchange where he tried to explain himself with Victoria Derbyshire.
It's embarrassing, isn't it? And it's just, I think was it Grant Shapps was on this morning, being questioned by Laura Koonsberg, or was it last week? And it's just nonsense. It's just saying we're going to stop the boats. We've stopped the boats, and we're delivering. They've just got these 5, sort of catchphrases that they're trying to sort of get out. And like I say, there's no new policy or anything coming through. It's it's just they've just gone now down this rabbit hole of foreigners are to blame for all of our woes, and specifically one type of foreigner as well.
Thanks, Hugh. And Martin, just about Stephen Flynn during the debate, I think so Stephen Flynn, the leader of the SNP, your party in Westminster, told Sunak that he was on his way out and asked if Sunak wanted the Rwanda bill to be his legacy. Sunak replied that illegal migration is not fair because they jump the queue and take away resources from genuine asylum seekers. And he claimed that his approach was fair and compassionate. I mean, were you there? What was that like?
Yeah. I mean, I just, people coming to this country seeking refuge have no recourse to public funds. None. This is just, and why the kind of mainstream media doesn't call that out, call it into question when they know that is the fact. And if you are, an immigrant into this country, you have no recourse to public funds. You actually pay an annual fee for NHS access to the National Health Service. You have no official recourse to no recourse to Social Security. I just find that it just buys into that reactionary right-wing narrative, and I think the mainstream media, notably, the state broadcasters, really need to up their game on this and start telling people the facts and not pandering to this basically racist, stupid terminology. And it really is quite extraordinary to watch.
And the language is incredibly subtle. I mean, Sunak, he talks about the foreign courts, when really what he means is international courts, and the UK signed up to those international courts laws. But there's one last thing that I've meant to touch on we haven't so far, is that didn't Sunak, again, forgive me, Martin, you can probably clarify this, didn't Sunak say that if the bill is passed, and it has been passed, well, it's going to go for amendments and the like, but it passed the vote, and he said that, so that means now that civil servants will be able to ignore international law, which puts them in a... Is that right? Or
yeah, there was I think there was an element about that, and it would need to come back to, I think, yeah. So kind of changing rules to allow the Home Secretary to sign it off before it went near kind of legal appraisal. Very dangerous tact, but again, it just part of that whole Tory rhetoric in the lead up to the next election, pandering to this extreme right wing. And let's be brutally honest, there are a lot of people who agree with this. And, it's up to folk like myself and others on the left, or even those in the middle ground, who don't believe in this policy, to articulate a different narrative about what's achievable with immigration, with safe routes. I'm the grandchild of immigrants to this country. We weren't treated very well when they first came here from Ireland. So, the idea that immigration is a bad thing, especially post-Brexit, is just crazy. We're crying out for people in the health and social care sector, crying out for people in the agriculture sector. We've seen the damage that Brexit has done there, and every other sector in the country. It's just woeful. It's just reactionary. It's the Tory campaign writ large for the next probably 8 months.
Reference to the general election, I'm guessing there. Thank you. I'll move on to the next item, which is Port Talbot. So Tata Steel is to shut down the Port Talbot blast furnaces, putting 3,000 jobs at risk. Tata rejected the trade unions' plans, which was put the UK on course to become the only major. Oh, sorry, forgive me. The union's plan was so it's a loss-making plant, and they want to make transition to greener productions using electric arc furnaces instead of what they have at the moment. Tata got £500 million from the government to help with that, but the government forgot to secure jobs for that cash. And the union, which Tata disagreed with, wanted a staggered transition which would have protected workers. So, Hugh, this is very close to home for you.
Yeah.
What can you say that's going to help my garbled introduction, for which I apologise?
Well, like I said, Port Talbot is literally 25 minutes from where I live. And I visit Port Talbot on a regular basis, and when you see the state of the middle of Port Talbot and Aberafan, it's a sad state as it is now. So with losing even more jobs, it just makes you think, what the future is going to be. But this is a failure of politicians across all political parties. And I include my own party, Plaid Cymru, in that. That we knew, when the demise of coal, that wasn't foreseen. And there was no plan for what would happen after coal disappeared. We knew this was coming, and yet again, there's no plan. That Tata, who were a multi-billion-pound company, who make this claim that they're losing £1 million a day, but yet I haven't seen any evidence of that. I've been looking for it, I've been asking for it. Nobody can seem to point me to how they're losing this amount of money. The union plan to phase, the closure by having one of the blast furnaces kept open while the electric arc furnaces were being commissioned, would have taken more than the 500 million that the UK government were offering. But the UK government weren't willing to offer any more. And it's also, sadly, it shows the weaknesses of devolution in Wales. Whereas, Mark Drakeford can send as many stern letters and demand as many phone calls as he wants. They're completely powerless in this. And what was interesting today is, in interviews with the shadow Welsh secretary from Labour, there was no real genuine commitment, to any change. Just saying that they've got this £30 billion or £3 billion green energy sort of plan, which is based over 10 years, which is 300 million a year. So, there's a lot of words coming out, but there's very few actions. And I'm also surprised with the fact that there's a general election on the horizon that Tata have made the decision now and gone, almost straight away. Because once you shut those furnaces down, it's very, very hard to get them going again.
Thanks, Hugh. And we lost Ravenscraig up here when Thatcher was in power, and I think part of the justification for that was that we didn't need two places like Yeah, Port Talbot and Ravenscraig. But remind me, is Port Talbot the one that it was sold for £1 to save it, or have I got that mixed up with something else?
Oh, there's so many because there was steelworks in Newport and Ebbw Vale. Both of those went. So again, because it was set up, Port Talbot, as the Welsh steel company. And people would have been able to sort of buy shares in it. But again, it shows the weakness of almost all of our heavy industry is owned by foreign parties. The common sense approach is to nationalise it, turn it into a cooperative, so we keep that capability. Because if these furnaces go down, because the difference is a blast furnace, you can take iron ore and create steel from iron ore. The new arc furnaces, which are much greener, but what they do is melt scrap, so you're reliant on having scrap. So if you did come to a point where we ran out of scrap in the UK, you wouldn't have any steel. And I think we're the only of the 20 sort of leading sort of world nations who wouldn't have their own domestic steel making capability.
Thanks, Hugh. Martin, is there anything that you'd like to say in response to what Hugh's been telling us?
Yeah, I mean, just transition. I mean, it takes time, and it should be done in a way in which supports the people of Port Talbot. And I represent Western Berkshire, and we know what it means to be left high and dry by governments turning their back on not just the industries, but on the people who have created and generated that wealth. I mean, let's not forget, for all the time that the Port Talbot steel industry has been up and running, that the people who work in those factories and those furnaces are the people who have generated the wealth that has come out of the selling of that steel. It's not the directors, it's not the owners, it is the actual people who are in that factory and in those working in those furnaces. And what do they have to show for it? Perhaps, probably nothing. Like my own community, where you had the exact same with the shipbuilding industry, what did we get? We got asbestosis and low wages and bad housing. We know the wealth that was generated from my parents and my grandparents probably now sits in the private vaults of some big individual who sends their kids to private schools, and we see absolutely no benefit to it whatsoever. I think what the UK government really does need to do is step up to the plate and work with the Welsh government and make sure that this happens over a longer period of time. Do I think that'll happen? No. To be frank, I think it's a situation they've worked themselves into. We look at the European Union, where we have 153 million tonnes of steel produced per year. It's 300, I think, around about 400,000 people working in the steel industry in the rest of the EU. And we were told that one of the reasons we didn't have an effective steel industry was because of EU regulation. I mean, just takes the biscuit. That's me being diplomatic.
Thanks, Martin. And recently, here in Scotland, Grangemouth, the oil refineries, that's fate's been sealed, agreed to. There's going to be support for a transition. Is there something in common between the two here? That you're trying to get to a just transition, but in the meantime, I don't know, governments.
Yeah, I mean, INEOS will have been making a lot of money on the backs of the people, not only at Grangemouth, but in the shipping and the production and other countries. And the UK government and INEOS have probably known that this has been coming for some time. And quite frankly, have they involved the rest of us? Have they involved the people of Grangemouth, who have been generating this amount of this value of wealth? Not at all. Not at all.
Okay, thanks, Martin. Hugh, has Grangemouth, does that make the news in Wales?
Not to the same level, and I think what's disturbing about this as well is how quickly Port Talbot has slipped down the UK news agenda. And I think if Grangemouth and Port Talbot were near Dover, I think we'd be getting a lot more attention towards both of them. But again, it's bonkers. INEOS, again, a multi-billion-pound company owned by Radcliffe, who's now bought a quarter of Manchester United. It's incredible, these companies who are owned either by individuals who contribute very little to the tax take in the United Kingdom, But yet, governments are always willing to hand over money to them, in order to keep them going. It's bizarre.
Thank you, Hugh and Martin. Move on to our final item, which is the Constitutional Commission on the Future of Wales has said that Welsh independence is a viable option. It also said that more powers should be devolved to protect Welsh devolution from attack. It's a major cross-party report into the constitutional future of Wales, and its final report recommended a range of measures to strengthen the current settlement, including the devolution of justice and policing. The report stressed that the status quo, or the current devolution settlement, is unsustainable due to Brexit, COVID, and decades of Tory-imposed austerity. And basically, it came up with 3 options for Wales down the line. They said the Barnett formula should be scrapped, and where are the 3 options? Forgive me, my notes are too small. I'm going to have to put my glasses on. I'm so sorry. 3 realistic options for Wales: a constitutional future, entrenched devolution, federalism, and independence. Martin, my glasses aren't as nice as yours, but Hugh. Hugh, I'm dying to hear what you think about this.
Yeah, it's a very important piece of work, but it's also, laid bare the weaknesses of the devolution settlement Wales got in comparison to Scotland. And the worrying thing that that's come out of this, obviously, the report, the interim report, is not the final report, which is a 100-page document. Put forward, those 3 options. There has been some criticism saying, that they should have looked at the option of, getting rid of the Senedd and getting rid of devolution. And I think that actually would have been a help, so people could have understood, what the impact of losing what we've got now would have. But no, it's clear, and we've seen with Port Talbot, the devolution as it is now, it just doesn't. We haven't got the levers in Wales, from a tax raising power or borrowing power, to be able to intervene, in these large scale issues. And obviously, it's good that independence is seen as a viable option, and it would have been crazy had it not been, seeing as that every other country in the world who've gone independent after being a dependent haven't gone back to being a dependent. Sort of independence is normal. So yeah, no, it's interesting. It's raised a debate and discussion. But what's interesting now is, it's up to the Welsh Government how they're going to look at the report and how they're going to respond to it. And the shadow Welsh Secretary for Labour was on radio and TV this morning saying that they would look at, what the Welsh Government would say, on a case-by-case basis. So not saying yes, whatever, a Labour Welsh Government says, this is what we want. We want devolution of justice and policing. There's no guarantee there that even a Labour government would deliver that. And again, which showing that, the weakness of the current setup is, we're in the hands of 84% of the UK public who live in England to decide what happens here in Wales.
So, do you think, is this going to be debated in the Senedd?
Well, I think the report now goes to the Welsh Government, which we've got a Labour-run government. Currently, the sort of the operations of government, the next 3 years, or the current 3-year plan, has been supported by Plaid Cymru, but this will go to Welsh Government, and it'll be up to them to decide, how, or what they do with the report and how it's implemented. But it's clear from the interim report that the basics that we need are things like sort of justice to be devolved to Wales, policing to be devolved to Wales. So it'll be interesting to see post the general election, when you've got Keir Starmer supposedly empowering Westminster, and we're continually told by Labour in Wales that when you have a Labour government in Wales and a Labour government in Westminster, that great things can happen. But I won't be holding my breath.
So, Martin, in Westminster, has this report made any impact? Have you heard anybody talk about it? And what did they have to say, if they did?
I think if you expect anyone in Westminster in the government or the official opposition to be talking about defending Welsh devolution, you're on the hiding to nothing, quite frankly. It always bamboozled me now that the report is out, that you have to see, well, colleagues from Wales still having to call for the evolution of policing and justice. I think that's absolutely extraordinary that we're still in a situation where the House of Lords, in terms of the judiciary of Wales, still has a role. That's part of the history of that constitutional situation. But if the Welsh government, along with other colleagues in other parties in Senate, don't raise this in a parliamentary debate in Cardiff, then I think they're doing themselves and Wales a profound disservice. After the Smith Commission, I have to say I wouldn't really take anything that the Unionist parties say at face value when it comes to, a real serious debate about the Constitution and whether it's about devolution or independence for Wales. And I think the onus rests on those who believe in those types of constitutional forms to articulate a debate, and I think this adds to that. And I do hope that at some point in the future that the decision on the governance of Wales should be left solely to the people who live there. And I just think the fact that their justice and policing is not controlled by the Senate is extraordinary in the 21st century.
Thanks, Martin. Staying with you, is that your rooster there, Hugh?
My cockroach outside, he's marking his turf.
Maybe it's Stormisha's coming. Martin, what do you think it would take for this to have an impact in Westminster, maybe to get debated or discussed in some way? What would have to happen?
Well, I think Hugh was alluding to it, there really needs to be a coherent response from the Senate. That needs to come not only from Plaid Cymru, but also from Labour in the Senate as well. They're part of this commission process. They need to defend its report, its conclusions. They need to do so vigorously. One would have hoped it may have been part of their general election campaign in Wales, but I don't think they'll be doing that. They'll be trying to steal too many Tory votes. And how you square that with calling for more devolution, I don't know. But we'll leave it to them and see how they come up. I'm sure Plaid in the chamber will be seeking any opportunity, which can be quite difficult for a group their size. We try and work along with them to get time within the chamber. But I think the onus will be on Labour in Wales to pick this up and try and run with it, but I wouldn't hold my breath.
Thanks, Martin. Hugh, one of the ways that I was asking Martin, how can this report actually have some impact? And
I think that the big thing, and I think Martin will be aware of this, is the difference between Labour in Wales and Labour in Westminster. So this constitutional report, it is, in fairness, it was a Welsh Labour government who commissioned it and have taken part fully in it. But then you've got Welsh Labour who want more devolution, and are quite open about the need for greater powers for the Senedd. They want to expand the numbers at the next election to have another third, an extra third, so for better scrutiny. But when it comes down to Westminster, who's going to raise this? It's not going to be Chris Bryant or Stephen Kinnock. They're wedded to Westminster. They don't want to see any power come to Wales. And I think what's going to come here is going to show, because as Martin was saying, in the general election, they will, fight on the, previously they would have done it on the back of Drakeford because, with COVID, he was popular. His popularity has declined following an introduction of 20 mile an hour speed controls in certain areas in Wales. But, generally, Labour in a general election, they will fight in Wales based on what will get them votes. So it'll be, Starmer versus Sunak. So, Wales goes to the back of the queue. But, I think it's up to Labour in Wales and their members, to make a stand. And it'll be interesting. We've got obviously we've got the competition now for the next leader of Labour in Wales and the next First Minister between Jeremy Miles, the Education and Welsh Language Minister, and Vaughan Gething, who is the Economy Minister. And quite frankly, I think Vaughan Gething has been shown up for being completely with Port Talbot, just taking his eye off the ball. So it'll be interesting to see who wins that contest and where they place the priority, that new First Minister, on constitutional change.
Thanks, Hugh. I've got a friend who's half Welsh, her family are all Welsh, and I remember having a conversation with her years ago, I think before when Brexit was being debated, and she said that she wasn't sure if Wales could be an independent country, and I was like, of course it can. I was quite staggered by that. But what's interesting in what you just said, you talked about the difference between Labour in Wales and Labour in England, and I'd add to that, and Labour in Scotland. It seems up here that Labour in Wales is more willing to counter Westminster and say that Westminster's to blame.
Yeah, and I think the difference there, and again, it'd be interesting to see what Martin thinks. But that Labour in Wales have been successful in holding back Plaid Cymru by basically parking their sort of soft, sort of patriotic Welsh tanks on Plaid Cymru's lawn, whereas in Scotland, the unionism has come over far stronger. So you've got Labour in Wales that is at odds with the Labour in Westminster, whereas I think Scottish Labour is far more comfortable and aligned with their Westminster colleagues.
Thanks, Hugh. And Martin, that reminds me of something that I was thinking about asking you earlier about how Scottish MPs, whether Labour or Tory, voted in the Rwanda bill, because we know how the SNP were going to vote. SNP was always against the Rwanda bill. But what do you think about this difference between Labour in Scotland and Wales and England? Because you work alongside all of them.
Well, Brian, there is only one Labour Party. It's the British Labour Party. There's no such thing as Scottish Labour or Welsh Labour. So let's be very clear that the Labour Party is a unionist party. The leader of the British Labour Party is a Knight of the Realm, who, for example, would defend unionism, for example, in Northern Ireland. Why would he not defend it in Scotland and Wales? So I don't find any difference. I just think maybe Mark Drakeford, when he was First Minister, had a slight, decided to kind of do it slightly differently. But it doesn't mean that he was not a unionist, and therefore, the question that we need to ask ourselves in Scotland is, having a seat at the table with a Labour MP is slightly different, given the fact that they've just been doing as they're told. Let's put it that way.
An excellent point. Very well put. Well, I think that's the end of the show. Thank you, Hugh. Thank you, Martin, for again giving up a sizable chunk of your weekend. Hopefully.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Brian, just to say for people who are watching in the west of Scotland, please take care today. There's a rather large storm coming. Make sure your trampolines are tied down, especially if you're near the train lines. That would be much appreciated.
Yes, thanks, Martin. And also, yeah, it was getting very dark outside your window, Hugh. I was thinking the same. I wondered if that was any sign of the storm where you are.
She's supposed to be arriving, but the trees are starting to sway, but it hasn't sort of struck yet. But fingers crossed it'll be over. But like I say, it does sound it's going to be quite bad, and it's going to be a prolonged one. I think that's the difference with this. It's expected to last for 28, 30 hours.
Yeah, so stay safe, everybody. Don't leave the house unless you really have to. That's it for this week's Full Scottish. But before I go, can I just remind you that here at Broadcasting Scotland, we do depend on the generosity of you, our supporters. So to everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, we thank you very much. You know that our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please do consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We are now £2,000 short of our target, and we had hoped to reach our £10,000 target by today. Although the pressure has been eased, we still need to raise that final £2,000 to pay our bills immediately, so we can focus on securing the future of an independent broadcasting for Scotland by growing our subscriber base and finding regular funding. But once again, thank you to my guests, to Hugh and to Martin. But that's it from Broadcasting Scotland for today. So goodbye and thank you for watching.